Okay, hello, welcome to Airsoft Pro Tips. Now, over the last couple of episodes we've spoken a lot about kit. We've spoken about your soft kit, we've spoken a lot about your hardware. Now, the next step, once you've been playing a couple of games, you will want to start forming a team. Now, teams can be composed of you, your mates, friends, family, or alternatively people you've met on the skirmish field. Now, when you form your team, what you're going to need to do is split yourself into different classes, so to speak. Now, your team will consist of a captain, and the majority of your team will be infantry, soldiers, whatever you want to call them. Now, your team will also have potentially snipers, heavy support gunners, grenadiers, medics, various other supportive roles, but we'll talk more about those in later videos. Today we're just focusing on the team captain and the infantry. So, first thing you've got to think of when you're forming your team is, are you forming it to go to a skirmish site, or alternatively are you forming it to go to a Milson site? Now, the biggest difference between them is skirmishing, you may get potentially 1 or 2 objectives over, say, 15 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer time span, and what you're really doing by having a team is getting organised. So you have lots of other people around you, and what you're doing is you're focusing your team more where you need them, focusing soldiers where you actually need to break the lines, get in, get those objectives. But in a milsim, you may have an entire day and have lots and lots of objectives over the day that you have to organise yourselves to take those. And having small teams, it really makes that job a lot easier. So, milsim, chain of command. Now, one of the first things you're going to need to do if you are planning to go to a milsim game is sort out your chain of command, because quite often at milsim games they're very rigorous with how they issue objectives. For example, they will only issue objectives to your team captains, things like that. So you have to have someone else nominated as your second in command, because as team captain, what if you take a hit? You can't always assume you're going to be in the game. Now, the next thing, once you've thought about that, is how are you going to form your units? Now, 2-man units, 4-man units, bigger units, smaller units. A lot of the time, if you're skirmishing, it doesn't really make much difference. It's really about supporting each other. Now, I would say a single person isn't really a unit. A unit should be a minimum of 2 people, but we'll talk about more of that later on. Now, generally speaking, from experience, I found a 4-man unit is best, because when you have more than a 4-man unit, you tend to find it difficult to manoeuvre sometimes, because you've got quite a lot of troops moving from place to place, and in the end of the day you shouldn't really move off until all your team is there ready to move, and it means you can be waiting much longer in one position for the rest of your team to catch up so you can move forward, which isn't necessarily the best thing. But having a 4-man unit means you've got that manoeuvrability, but then when someone comes up, you make contact with an enemy, generally speaking you're not outmanned, and also generally speaking you're not outgunned. So, what is the captain's role? What is the captain's role, and what is the actual role of the infantryman? Well, the infantryman is essentially a jack of trades of the airsoft field. You can do pretty much anything. You can be there to defend objectives, you can move in to take objectives, you can hold ground, lay ambushes, set traps for your enemies, things like that. There's a lot of things you can do as being a basic infantryman. Team captain, generally speaking, is essentially an infantryman, but the difference is you're the one issuing orders. So you're the one saying, okay, get set up over there, we're going to lay an ambush, this is the plan on how we're going to take this objective, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about kit. Now, first of all, your weapon. Now, infantry, probably best to go with a weapon something similar to this, maybe some of the standard length M16s, maybe if you want to go for something a bit shorter, that's okay as well. Now, the reason I say this is because you've got automatic fire, you've got single shot fire as well, you can get nice and close, get up on the CQB, room clearing, around buildings, things like that, but also you've got a reasonable range with this kind of gun. Now, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't also go with something like this, one of the long barrels for the M16s. This is an M16 upper receiver. They just give you a little bit more range, but you still maintain the lower, you still have the same rate of fire, and to be honest, when you're infantry and you're moving up, you really do need that rate of fire because you need to be able to support each other, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Now, radios. Things like these. Now, radios are useful, but they are not a necessity by any means. Just talking to the rest of your team is good enough, but if you're planning to split off into smaller units, these can be very, very useful. Now, different radios, different costs, different price ranges, different features. This one and the other one you saw are fairly cheap ones. They're good enough for skirmishing, but people can listen in on your band, hear what you're doing, you know. Some of the more expensive ones, you have the ability to lock channels, and some of the military PMR radios, I think it's PMR radios, you actually have to pay for frequencies, but then once you've got your frequency, no one else can listen in on it, and things like that. They're very, very expensive. These aren't very expensive. So it really comes down to what you're after. Now, different sites have different rules on listening in on your opponent's frequency. Some will say you can, some will say you can't, and they'll not be happy if they find you are after you have been told you can't. But all these radios are fairly similar in essence. So, what about your main TAC kit? Well, really it comes down to personal choice. Are you going for a particular look, you know, Spetsnaz or US infantry, British infantry? If you're going for a specific look, you can go with specific kit, but one thing to bear in mind is don't get yourself overburdened. Alright, now when you're in the field, it's very important to not overburden yourself with kit. Now, like I've said many times before, this is my plate carrier, fairly lightweight rig, plus it has dummy plates. Now, these dummy plates are hollow plastic. They really look cool, but they're not very heavy either, and they do give you a little bit of hit protection, especially if you get hit close in the chest. Now, other kits, lots of different kit available. Some are heavy, some are lighter. Now, when I started playing, I actually used to wear a proper bulletproof jacket. I used to wear proper body armour with an actual bulletproof plate in it. Very heavy. I used to take it off halfway through the game, but it looked really, really cool, but it's not something I would recommend doing. Now, one of my favourite kits to wear is I've actually got a Spetsnaz kit, which I can't show you at the moment, but I will hopefully show that in a later video, which basically consists of a jacket, a shirt, and some LBEs, or load-bearing equipment, which is basically just a harness and a belt rig. Now, on my belt rig I've got my pistol, knife like I normally have, and then pretty much the rest of it is just a couple of pouches. Very, very lightweight kit. Yes, there's not a lot of room for flexibility, but it's very, like I said, I keep saying it's very light because it is. It's very, very good for getting from one side to the side to the other, because you can just get your ammo in there and just run, and you don't have to be burdened down with kit. So, also with your weapon, when you are the soldier, chances are you want your primary weapon. You may want a pistol with you, possibly something like this as a backup weapon, but really you don't want to be burdening yourself. Don't carry lots of equipment, don't be carrying a heavy support gun, don't be carrying a sniper rifle. Just take what you need.